Number 2. Operation Desecrate 1. During World War II, American naval power started to rise on the southern flank of Japan's Pacific border in 1944. The islands in this area played a crucial strategic role in protecting the conquered territories of the Philippines, Indochina, Malaya, Borneo, and the Dutch East Indies. The defense of the islands eventually evolved into an aerial conflict that the Japanese Air Force couldn't overcome in the face of American military superiority. By the end of March 1944, the majority of the Pacific had been taken over by Americans. The Japanese Navy was basically destroyed. Just a handful of warships, tankers, cargo ships, troop carriers, and a few seaplanes were left. Once the U.S. gained air control over the Palau Islands on March 30, 1944, most of the Japanese warships and commerce ships stationed there were in jeopardy and highly vulnerable to aerial attacks. The Japanese fleet had to face a barrage of torpedoes, bombs, rockets, and strafing assaults as a result of bombings known as Operation Desecrate 1. Desecrate 1 was part of the setup for Operations Reckless and Persecution, the Allied invasion of Western New Guinea. The U.S., with the strongest navy in the world, carried out the bombing until March 31, 1944. The Japanese were unprepared. As a result, they lost well over 50 ships and countless planes. Due to its diversity, accessibility, and history, the sunken fleet in Palau is one of the most unusual collections of ships in the world. The main port of Palau, Malacca Harbor, has over a dozen world-class wrecks near or in the harbor itself. The fleet was made up of a wide range of naval and merchant ships. Only a handful of them survived Desecrate 1, ranging in size from small boats like the colorful Boy 6 wreck to the 492-foot-long Amatsu Maru. The majority of these vessels are still there more than 50 years later, while they slowly decay from salt water and encrusting microbes. In the shallow lagoon, the dead fleet now acts as a network of new artificial reefs, attracting a whole different variety of fish and creatures than the drop-offs of the barrier reef, which are Palau's main claim to fame. In particular, the Iro served as an oiler and supply ship during its time. She was destroyed on March 30, 1944 during Desecrate 1. The explosive caused significant structural and fire damage to the ship's engine room, boat deck, and stack. A survivor from the assault saw a direct strike on the engine room where nearly 30 engineers were killed instantly. Currently, this wreck is upright at a depth of 131 feet. The top of the mast is barely 26 feet off the deck as the bridge and the mast rise over top of it. Both the front and back guns remain in position. The Iro Maru is surrounded by sea life, including lionfish, clownfish, and a boatload of coral. If you wish to dive down to the site, be sure to stay away from the deadly ammo still strewn about the ship that has survived since World War II. The Amatsu Maru, with a total length of 492 feet and a beam of 65 feet, is the largest World War II shipwreck in all of Palau. It sits 131 feet below water with the deck 98 feet under the waves. It is better suited for experienced divers because of this. Those less experienced should stick to the wreck's exterior, while more confident divers can explore the inside of the oil tanker. Due to the abundance of black coral trees growing over the ship's hull creating a magnificent view, this dive site is also called Black Coral Wreck. Another ship destroyed during World War II and sunk in 1944 as a result of Operation Desecrate was the Chiyu Maru. This amazing wreck site is home to a large variety of marine life, including soft corals along the deck and rails and breathtaking black coral. Lionfish, transparent shrimp, oysters, clams, pipefish, eels, and other marine life also claim the wreck as home. The site's greatest depth is 108 feet, and experienced divers will find this spot ideal for exploration. On March 30, 1944, just after 1 p.m., a 500-pound bomb launched the initial attack. Following reports of severe fires on board, the vessel sank at 8 p.m. on April 1, 1944. One unnamed shipwreck that sits directly in Malacca Harbor is simply known as the Helmet Wreck because of its perfectly placed pile of Japanese helmets discovered inside her cargo holds. This little ship, which is barely 189 feet long, lies on the bottom part of the sloping harbor. The dive profile is noteworthy since the bow descends to 110 feet, while the stern can be reached at 50 feet. This wreck has a variety of fascinating points of interest, such as gas masks, ammo, and weapons. The ship is still mostly intact and in decent shape considering its watery resting place. Many destroyed aircraft provide excellent diving locations. The Jake seaplane, a Japanese Navy recon float plane, is notable among them. On top of a coral head, Jake sits upright in 49 feet of water, largely undamaged. Despite having fallen off, its engine sits near the plane. The lack of damage to its propellers suggests that the plane crashed during a landing. It wasn't discovered until 1994, when a fisherman spotted it from the surface. Aircraft operations in 1944 were designed to prepare the ground for amphibious assaults. They started in September of that year, specifically on the southern island of Peleliu. The takeover of this island was a top objective for U.S. forces because General MacArthur believed it was essential for the eventual takeover of the Philippines. The island and its airstrip had been under Japanese control since World War I. The battle was expected to last about 3 days as the first wave of the 1st Marine Battalion made amphibious landings on Orange Beach. A month of grueling warfare ensued, resulting in significant deaths on both sides. The wrecks near Palau and the surrounding islands serve as a reminder of the cruelty of war, while also giving us insight on the harsh reality soldiers and locals of that time had to face. Would you ever go diving in an old shipwreck? Let us know in the comments and subscribe if you like what you've seen so far. Number 1. Graveyard of the Pacific. The Pacific Northwest is naturally very dangerous. Risky situations are present everywhere, from sprouting volcanoes to toppling cliffs. But few places rival the Graveyard of the Pacific in terms of the number of lives lost and the amount of devastation that has happened there. The region, which contains several rocky reefs and shorelines, stretches from Tillamook Bay in Oregon, along the Washington coast, and to Vancouver Island. The Columbia River's mouth, though, is perhaps the most dangerous spot. The large river mouth, which sits on the border between Oregon and Washington, is home to changing sandbars, rough seas, and incredibly strong winds, which makes it a nightmare for ships coming in from the ocean. Europeans and Americans tirelessly searched for this river of the West and were the first to learn of the bar's wickedness. Observations of foreign ships washed up on beaches as early as 1700 are mentioned in local legend. Bruno Heceta, a Spaniard, charted the Columbia's entry for the first time in 1775, but his crew's sickness prevented any further in-depth exploration. In May of 1792, an American merchant named Robert Gray, whose Columbia Rediviva gave the river its name, actually succeeded in crossing the bar. Later, an armed tender of the Royal Navy named HMS Chatham came dangerously close to being the graveyard of the Pacific's first casualty. Then, in 1792, Captain George Vancouver sent Lieutenant William Broughton to investigate Captain Gray's report of the large river. The Columbia was explored by Broughton. Chatham ran aground on what would later be called Peacock Spit on the northern side of the river mouth as she tried to leave the river. Broughton successfully avoided losing control of his ship by racing it off the beach. At the beginning of the 19th century, merchants navigated the currents, breakers, and the shifting channels of the mouth while they exploited the area's fur supply. 5 sailors lost their lives when the brigantine Hazard sent a small boat to take soundings in 1798. In 1829, the British bark William and Anne capsized on Clatsop Spit while taking supplies to the Hudson Bay Company's Fort Vancouver. Multiple people were killed in this incident. A Navy ship of war called the USS Peacock ran aground in 1841 close to Cape Disappointment and was destroyed by high waves. No one was hurt as the team escaped by boat. Its wreckage now remains as Peacock Spit. Another Navy vessel, the schooner USS Shark, ran aground on the Columbia River bar just 5 years later. The ship was completely wrecked by the rough storms, and parts of it drifted southward down the coastline. Some of it washed up in the region known as Cannon Beach. 3 catastrophes happened in 1849 alone as seaborne trade expanded. 5 wrecks were reported between 1852 and 1853. The shifting bar was the main issue. Only months later, what used to be a safe route earlier on in the season now invited grounding and calamity. At this point, sailors finally gave the mouth the nickname Graveyard of the Pacific. One of the most notable wrecks before the turn of the century was the USS Pacific, which sank near Cape Flattery in 1875. It was one of the graveyard's deadliest shipwrecks. The Pacific's captain saw a light in the area and assumed it was the Cape Flattery lighthouse. But when he moved the steamboat west, the Orpheus, a sailing ship, was the true origin of the light. It was the worst West Coast accident ever at the time, with only 2 of 275 passengers surviving. There were 25 more shipwrecks between 1890 and 1910, a high figure for the 20th century. Off the Columbia River mouth on January 4, 1890, the schooner Dearborn was found capsizing but still floating. Her crew was never found, not even a trace of them. The steam schooner Protection, sailing from Seattle to San Francisco with a cargo of timber, perished in a fierce storm on January 1, 1900, killing every member on board. The British bark Cape Wrath, coming from Peru to Portland, was observed outside the mouth of the Columbia on January 16, 1901, but she and her 15 crew members were never seen or heard from again. Another steamboat, the Clallam, traveling from Seattle to Victoria via Port Townsend, capsized outside of Victoria Harbor on January 8, 1904, killing 56 people. The steamer SS Valencia, headed from San Francisco to Seattle, collided with Pachina Point on Vancouver Island on January 26, 1906, while trying to cross the Strait of Juan de Fuca. A total of 136 people were killed. According to some, the USS Valencia sinking was the greatest maritime accident to date in the graveyard of the Pacific. On October 25, 1906, the Peter Iredale, a 4-masted steel sailing ship headed for the Columbia River, went aground on the Oregon coast. It was eventually abandoned. Since the debris is still visible, it is one of the graveyard's most accessible shipwrecks and a well-visited tourist destination. The boat simply stayed there since no one could get it out safely. It has steadily become worse for wear over the past 101 years. A sizable portion of the ship is still visible, and at low tide, it is fairly easy to get up close. One tanker's captain mistook the North Head light for the light ship on January 7, 1913, causing the ship to slam onto the Peacock Spit before sinking. The only survivors were 4 men who were found clinging to the rigging by rescuers. Only 3 were saved. Even then, the Point Adams rescue vessel had to sail alongside the light ship to find safety. There were about 32 fatalities. There were countless occasions where multiple steamboats were ruined by fire. On July 8, 1915, large flames broke out in Wenatchee. The majority of the Columbia and Okanagan Steamboat Company's vessels were docked near one another at a riverside barge. Chullen was the closest inshore, while North Star was on the outskirts. Columbia and Okanagan were in between. A fire started aboard North Star after 11 p.m., spread fast to vessels beside her, and destroyed them all. Although never proven, arson was heavily suspected. This fire destroyed the Columbia and Okanagan steamboats, and the Enterprise sank shortly after. Many more boats wrecked due to fires, collisions, and bad weather, floods, and more. The Columbia River Maritime Museum in Astoria reports that more than 700 people have died and 2,000 boats have sunk in the Columbia River since 1792 alone. The Columbia River Bar Pilots was established in 1846 to help vessels direct ships as they approach the river's mouth. Though the location continues to draw risk, the number of shipwrecks decreased during the 20th century with experience and large advancements in technology. The mouth of the Columbia River continues to be one of the most dangerous locations in the Pacific Northwest due to shipwrecks, waves, deserted batteries, and subpar weather. Thanks for watching. Have you ever seen a shipwreck in person? Tell us about your experience down in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to see our next video.